Okay, so here we're going to build on custom patterning and the kind of placement of objects in a list. So this is a nice way of working with lists, kind of in the basic sense, figuring out how to basically place objects where you want them in a list, as opposed to extracting them, which is kind of what we saw last time. You know, when we were kind of just selecting certain points from an overall set. This is also partially covered in the textbook for the class, the primer, and but I'm going to build on it in a few different ways. So there'll be two examples here, and then there'll be two more examples in the next and final tutorial. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is once again build a grid. Just choose the rectilinear grid here. And this is just going to be something that we need to, basically we're going to use this as our target locations for this exercise, basically this patterning exercise, which is, I think oftentimes produces really nice results using a really simple logic here. So I'm just going to use a slider this time, crank it up to 10, just increase the size of might be a little, maybe that's a little too big. Doesn't have to be that big. I'll just go to 7 feels about right in my case. Just kind of even out my grid there, and now in order in the for the other input here in terms of how many, just put that out to 10. All right, 10 and 10 in both directions. Okay, so your grid might fit differently. I just wanted to kind of fill out my base grid there. You can choose whatever sizes you like. Doesn't really matter. Before I forget, the next thing I'm going to do is just kind of flatten this output. Take a look at that in just a moment. We're going to do a little bit of Rhino work for this, just to kind of get the example set. So what we're going to basically do is develop two little custom little tiles here, if you will, two little objects, created from lines, and we're going to place them in a particular order in these boxes, and then we're going to kind of hide the boxes to reveal a more complex pattern than what you might think could come out of, you know, just kind of working with pretty standard grids. All right, so first I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I'm going to hold Shift, keep it a square. All right, and I'm just going to copy and paste that. So I have two. Next thing I'm going to do for this one is just kind of draw a line across, and then draw another one to the corner like this. And then for the other one, I'm going to find a center point. I'm going to find the mid from there to there, and then again from here to here. I can delete that and then draw another line similar to the first one, except it's going to look like this. So there's going to be 3 lines here and 2 lines there. You could also make this a polyline. I suppose it doesn't really matter because we're going to end up grouping it anyhow. The important thing is that we have geometry that we're going to have, basically that's going to set our pattern, and then we have a bounding box around it. Okay, we're going to relate these things to these boxes using this as a reference, if that makes sense to you. All right, so let's bring some things in here. Let's go ahead and grab our first tile, we'll call it, and we'll grab multiple curves here. So we'll grab these two. All right, and I'll do that again for the others. So I'll grab these. All right, and now I'm going to do the same thing for the boundaries. All right, I'm going to kind of keep them kind of proximate to one another. So I have boundary 1, tile 1, tile 2, and then I'll make the boundary 2 as well. All right, second curve. There we go. So that's all associated. Now what I can do is kind of right click in these and I can name them. So I'm just going to call this tile 1. Click this little button on the side there. I'm going to call this border 1 so I stay organized here. And then tile 2. And then border 2 just to keep things nice. All right. And then what we want to do, because this has got some multiple items in it, we're just going to pass this through a group. So I'm just going to double click in here and just type in group. And we'll find that there. You can also find it in the transform tab under utilities. So basically I'm going to group that set of lines there. You can copy paste that and put that also through my tile. You don't have to do this with the border because that's a single rectangle. So what we're going to do now is kind of merge the two tiles together into one stream and then merge the borders together in one stream. because we're going to use a single component to kind of remap them, their locations. All right, so let's go to set, tree, and merge. Go ahead and that. You can delete this this third one there. It doesn't matter as much, but that's an automatic thing. And let's go ahead and merge the other two, right, the borders together, like so. And I'll just kind of make an alignment there. And for this exercise, we're going to need a rectangle mapping component. So let's go ahead and double click, type in rectangle, and it should come up rectangle mapping. You can also find it under transform and affine, and you'll find rectangle mapping. Okay, and let's see what this thing needs. It needs some base geometry. Okay, it's going to need a source. Basically a source box, and it's going to need a target rectangle, right? So we know our targets, it's going to be the grid. That's where we want to place stuff. The sources and the geometry, we can't yet place just yet. We actually need to repeat this data a number of times in order to match the number of boxes we have here. But in order to do that, we also need to set a custom pattern where we want these to go and at what time. Okay, so what we're going to do then is choose we're going to go over to set, and we're going to find this, let's see where it is here, repeat data component under sequence. Right? And here's where we're going to set our custom pattern. You know, we just kind of went through an exercise where we set a pattern before, when we were selecting points. Here we're going to set a different pattern to actually place objects within the list of rectangles. And here I'm just going to set 0, 1, 1, 1, 0. All right, and this is because I've done a little testing, and this is where I want to start. And we'll modify from there. So again, it's multi-line data. Afterwards, you type in, you right-click, you click multi-line, but before that, you're typing in 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, putting them on different lines. And that's the D input and pattern. We then need to know how many times to repeat this pattern. So we have to get a little information from our grid cell outlines. For that, we can go to set and list length. So let's figure out how long that list is, and that'll give us an idea for how long or how many times we want to repeat this. Basically, you know, what's the length of the final pattern given this number of things. Okay, so we have 100 things there. It's basically repeating this data enough times to get to an overall value of 100, because we have 100 cell outlines. Okay, nice little match. And then we're going to go over to sets here and grab our list item component, and I'm going to pass this in through here. And that's going to select well, by default, because this is a 0, it's going to select the first tile. You can see this went green. But I can also use this to determine basically a pattern where we're going to place, you know, basically the pattern. So you can see here we have 100 outputs here, 100 groups. And basically this is just saying choose 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. We know we only have 0 and 1 to select from because we only have 2 groups. And those groups can be described as 0 and 1. If we had 4, we'd have 0, 1, 2, and 3. And we'll get to that in the next example. So don't get too tripped up on this just yet. Copy and paste that, and we can do the same thing for the boundaries because we want those two things to relate. Now we have enough information to go ahead and get started. We have our geometry, and we're going to need our source. Okay, now let's turn off the grid, and the pattern will be revealed. This has got a pretty gridded appearance in most areas. You can sort of read the boundaries here, but here it's actually pretty interesting. It starts to kind of develop this almost, you know, diagonal brick coursing or something. So let's go ahead and play with the pattern a little bit. You can just delete the 0 at the end, maybe, see how that does. And that's pretty nice. This gives us a nice little, almost like tree branch-like appearance, right? We have these kind of nesting trees, and then there's a piece that sort of slides into it. And now we start to dissolve away, basically, at its original organization. It's a little bit harder now to tell that it started with a grid. It's a repeating, you know, it's a repeating pattern, of course, but you get some kind of interlocking effect, really, that you know, is kind of it's interesting because it sort of dissolves the grid from which it came. So go ahead and experiment a little bit. You can play around with the 1s and 0s, and different things will come out of it. As long as you just keep it within the realm of 1 and 0. That's pretty similar to what we saw before. Of course, if you don't have any zeros, you'll just repeat the same one over and over again. So basically, it's a little trial and error just to see what kind of things come out of it. This is actually quite nice. And you can put as many, basically, as many ones and zeros in this as you like. And obviously, the more you have, the more, I guess, the less repeating you'll see. Oops. Because this, remember, this pattern will repeat over and over again throughout the grid. Okay, let's move into an example that uses 4 instead of 2. All right, I'm just going to go back over here. I think I had, yeah, let's just do that or something. I think that looks pretty cool. All right, so now we have 2 tiles here that we've basically placed throughout the grid in order to get this interlocking thing going. I'm just going to cover one more way of doing this, which uses 4 instead of 2 to develop a little bit more of a complex pattern with some more possibilities. And the first thing I'm going to do is go back to Rhino, and I am going to draw another, well, I guess we can copy one of these rectangles out. That's fine. Just going to draw these over here, and let's make 4 of them. All right, so let's do 1, 2, and I'll just hold Alt with the gumball here and just make 4 tiles. And then I am going to draw, and you should pay attention to this part because the way I draw this, it's going to look like a diagonal line, but actually it's a triangle, and that's because later on down the line I actually want to make a surface out of this. It'll make it easier to do some hatching. So I'm going to draw the first triangle like this, from that point to that point, this one, and then up again as a polyline. So there's the first tile, and then I'll draw the next one like this, where that's the kind of bottom corner, if you will. And then I'll go from here. So I'm drawing all possibilities, basically. In a box, you can get 4 triangles out of any box. Well, yeah, I think that's true. So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. All 4 possibilities have been drawn for us here. All right, so let's go ahead and bring these in, and I'm going to reuse some of this, but not all of it. So what I'm going to do is just go back over to parameters and do the same thing I did before. So I'm going to grab some curve parameters here. I'm going to work down below, and I'm just going to first set that triangle. And I'll work kind of quickly here because you can probably see where this is going. And I'm going to basically set all these in there separately. This. All right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Now let's do the same thing for our boundaries. And I'll give these a little breathing room here because we're going to put those next to it. I'm going to put these over here to keep it organized. Right, so 1, that's our boundary for that. 2, that's our boundary for that. And be careful not to pick the triangle for this. All right. Make sure you're picking the square. Okay, good. Got our boundaries and our tiles. Go ahead and rename these if you like. I'm just going to place them close to one another for now, just to kind of keep the time on this tutorial, so as to not. You can go ahead and pause and rename these if you like. I'm just going to make little kind of bubbles around them, so I know that the top is always the tile itself, and the bottom one is always the. And these are. Is always the boundary, and these are associated with one another. All right. Okay. And then the next thing I'm going to do, I guess I'm going to just move this up. Well, I don't know, maybe it's actually useful to just do some copying and pasting here, or redoing. So I'm just going to go ahead and redo it, actually. I'm going to take this set of components up here, the repeating ones, and actually I'm going to need a few of these. I'm going to need 1 per tile, because I'm going to set a custom pattern per tile instead of an overall pattern like I did before. All right, I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to set this as such, right? Let's see what happens if I go 3, 1, and then multi-line. Oh, it's already multi-line. Whoops. And then I'll set this one to 1, 2, and I'll set this one to 2, 0. and this one here to 0, 3. Okay, this will repeat the same number of times we had it before so that it exhausts the possibilities of the grid. Now the trick is, how do we shuffle these around so that they don't overlap? So let's take a look at that. So we're going to merge these together. So I'm just going to go over to Sets, Merge. All right. Put these in. Okay. And now what I'm going to do, we have to pay attention to something. Because we did a copy and paste, this is not the number of things that actually we want. We're actually going to only repeat this the number of times we need to fill a column or a row. I'm going to try first with the Y going in the up direction here. So I'm going to reuse this slider and I'm going to plug that into the L here. All right. Because we're basically going to, now what we're doing is setting a repeating pattern per column. And we're going to do that over. And it's going to then happen in sequences. So it's going to go first through this one in the first column, then through this one in the second column, this one in the third, and that one in the fourth. Then it's going to repeat that whole thing for as many columns as I have. Okay, and the way it's going to do that is to simply take another one of these repeat components, bring that over here, because this is an overall pattern we can repeat now, and we need to repeat it that number of times or to fill that number of boxes. So here we should have 100 outputs. Here you're only going to have 10 because that's as big as our columns are. Okay. Okay, so now it's just a matter of basically doing what we did down here, except these, instead of just having 2 inputs, we'll have 4 for both, and it's going to go into the same component base. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and start merging stuff. So let me grab the merge again, go to Sets, Tree, Merge, and I'm going to put the tiles together first. This is our geometries. And then I'll put I'll just copy and paste that and just replace the inputs with the boundaries that relate in the same order. So keep that in mind, that the orders have to be exactly the same. Let me just put these down here. And I'll move some stuff so that doesn't get too crowded. You know, the lines are at least still easy to trace. And I like to make sure it doesn't get too visually confusing for me. And then we'll go over to the list component again. So we're going to go list length, sorry, list item, excuse me. And the data that we're going to be repeating is going to come in to the index. We can do that twice. And of course, then the stuff that we want to output is going to be those two. And that can go back into the remap component. All right, so now because I've got this stuff still on, I'm going to turn all that off so I don't see it. And I can still see it because that's still on. So I'm going to go ahead and start replacing. And it's going to make a little bit of a mess first, but in the end, it finally organizes. Let's take a look at this a little bit more carefully now. We've got our pattern emerged. Right? We've got a pattern for the first column, the second column, the third, and the fourth, and then that repeats again. So you'll see so 1 and 5 are the same, 2 and 6 are the same, and so on and so forth. But because these are polylines, we can make these surfaces. We can take a look at what we have here. So we'll go to surface and boundary surface to make basically a little surface there. Now it's kind of nice, right? What we have is a pretty interesting little tiling scheme here that actually, really in my mind, dissolves the grid, especially if you were to, actually, why don't we go through and just put a custom color on this. Let's put a custom preview on this. Let's go to display, custom preview. This is the stuff we'll preview. Let's turn this stuff off. And then I'm just going to go over to parameters here and just grab a color swatch from the input tab there and make it black in my case. You can do the same. I want to make it black with, so that I can kind of, I'm going to ignore, I'm trying to remove basically these little lines from the preview, but this is a good sense for it. I mean, we can start to see that when you don't see the triangles anymore, really what you see are the overall figures. And now it's this interlocking pattern of these diagonal figures, that is intended to dissolve away at the triangle, dissolve away at the organizing grid, and really just kind of produce a more complex pattern from it. The variety of what you can achieve with just triangles is really pretty amazing. So I encourage you to try different Boolean patterns here. Sorry, these are not Boolean patterns, but different patterns here of basically index selections in order to derive different kinds of outputs, different results. So we can make changes to any of these. We can even change the order of them, and different things will happen. And I'm just randomly doing this. I don't really have any expectation for what's going to happen here. If I really wanted to plan it out, I'd probably be a little bit more careful. But in any case, you can see that basically what we're doing is assigning a location for a number of objects in a structured grid. And we're structuring those locations by repeating that information over the course of 4 columns because we have 4 tiles. There are other ways to do this. You can add as many of these as you like, or reduce these if you like. You'll just have different results. You can also include another tile into one of these, and that would also make a change. Okay, and that wraps us up, at least for this example. We're going to go through randomization in the next one in both square grids and hexagonal grids.